Okay.
So, hi, I'm Karen, and I'm going to be talking about, does prison work? So, to start off, I'm going to start with this video.
Peter, Meg's been suspended from school.
That's okay, whatever she wants to do.
She cracked 3 kids' skulls open. Ever since she's gotten out of prison, she's completely out of control.
Don't you see, that's what the penal system does in this country. It turns small-time offenders into hardened criminals. Look at Meg. They took an innocent little girl and turned her into a psychotic, sociopathic freak.
What'd you say, Brian?
Oh, I was just picking up on something Lois said. What'd you say, Lois? Something about Meg being a freak?
Oh, no. I didn't say anything. Peter said something about Meg, which I completely disagree with.
Oh, that wasn't me. Stewie was really laying into Meg about something. Yeah, it was Stewie.
Definitely Stewie.
Oh, so now everyone understands me.
Look, Meg, we're just worried about you.
Don't.
Okay, so, this is, for some background information. Okay, Meg Griffin fell in love with a convict, someone who was in prison, and he escaped for one night and came over, and she was hiding him, and this is, conspiracy, and, it's just a big-time felon, and so she went to prison for a few months and came out this hardened criminal and just completely changed everything who she used to be. And sadly, this happens in real life, like all the time. So hopefully by the end of my speech, I can show you 3 things that are the most debated issues, like why prison doesn't work. Those are the flawed sentencing systems, the rehabilitation methods inside of prison, and the major one, life after prison. So, flawed sentencing systems. There's a lot of different factors that depend on how long your sentence is going to be. There's the type of crime, the severity of the crime, the state and federal guidelines that the judge has to follow when, where the crime is committed. The laws are different in Oregon than they are in Florida, and such, all that stuff. And of course, the judge. And the major flaw in this system is that sometimes the judges are not very just. Their sentencing isn't very justly. And if all those factors were paid attention to 110% of the time, then I can guarantee that the sentences given to those inmates for minor crimes would definitely be lessened, and they wouldn't feel like because they did such a minor thing that they're a bad person and then come out being this, wanting to rob banks and wanting to kill people and wanting to do more drugs. You know what I'm saying? I mean, yeah, okay. From 1979 to 2001, over 2.1 million Americans were sentenced to prisons and jails all around the country, and that's a really big number, and it's rising. This was only from 2001. An example of a case where the judge didn't look at all the sides and just based something off of the color of someone's skin or discriminatory in some ways. This is alleged because it's still a case going on, was a man named Kenneth Lumpkin. And in 1996, he was arrested for playing a minor role in a conspiracy to sell crack cocaine because he needed the money. And it was discovered, this conspiracy, and he was arrested, and he was sentenced to 20 years in prison for this nonviolent offense. And there are some murders that only get about 7 to 8 years, and they get let off on probation and stuff like that. And this man, who played a minor role in this conspiracy, was sentenced to 20 years. And in that time, he would be missing his daughter's graduation from high school, his son's granddaughter's birth, and all these things. And he says, and many other people say, that the judge was the one who was being discriminatory because of the color of his skin. And this is just one of hundreds and hundreds of cases where people are judged by their ethnic background and sentenced to an unjust amount of time. So next, there is rehabilitation methods inside of prison. After speaking with someone who was actually in prison, I asked a couple of questions saying, what did you do inside of prison when you were there? Did they help you at all, to find the root cause of why you ended up there and things like that? And they said that it was more of an educational process, which is good because you want your prisoners to, be educated so that when they go out, they can find jobs. They are educated and they're not just totally let loose because, a lot of the people that do end up in prison and in jails are not very educated. So they took like general math classes and typing and some history and stuff like that, but this is just another cause that doesn't really help the prisoners because when they get out of prison, they can't even find jobs because of their record, which I'll talk about later. But it's just good, it's good to see prisoners become educated to an 11th grade level, but they really need to focus on why they ended up there, and more funds need to be focused on the psychological problems, and like why they need, and like how they can prevent it from happening again when they are let out. So, some people refer to prison as modern-day slavery at times because they're forced to work labor in most prisons, not all, but they work like even back then to now. They're doing labor, hard labor, and they're paid about like 10 cents an hour maybe, and this is supposed to, like show them moral like fiber and build their strength up to show like they deserve this punishment and this is working for the better good of society, but it's also supposed to pay off the government. But is that even realistic? 10 cents an hour? In 20 years, you're supposed to pay off these millions of dollars that, our parents are paying and some of us are paying, and it's just, if you think about it, it is kind of like modern day slavery, but that's a whole other topic, and I'll let you decide. And this, to me, is the biggest issue, life after prison. Okay, so this is kind of confusing, but stick with me. Since 1998, there have been an estimated 600,000 people per year released from prison. So 100,000 of those 600,000 are released without any supervision, no probation, no parole, just, kind of released. A third of those convicts were drug abusers and still are because they weren't getting what they needed inside of prison to rehabilitate themselves. And a fourth of them were convicted for violent crimes. Now 16% of those 100,000 without supervision are also mentally ill. So if they're not getting what they need in prison and they're let out, thinking all of these things in prison, confined in a space, set to certain times and regulations, how are they supposed to handle themselves when they're let go and they have all this freedom with no supervision at all? So overall, 60% of people who are let out of prison end up back in jail. That's obviously not okay, because when you think of prison, you think of something it's like a punishment, they're keeping you locked up, keeping the community safe, but people tend to forget about, they don't stay in there forever, or the majority of them. And when they let out, you don't want them to be a harmful factor in society. You want them to be productive and positive, but it's really hard for them to re-enter society in a productive and positive way because, because of their record. Even if it's a small crime, if it says that you were in prison for a certain amount of time for any crime, you can't get a driver's license for, and it depends in states, but applying to get new driver's license, adopting a child, voting, and even receiving federal aid for education and food is usually always, it's always a struggle. And a lot of the times they're rejected for their attempts to get all these things. And voting is a really big deal for prisoners, like ex-convicts. 13 states have banned the right to vote to all ex-convicts for their life. They can never vote again, no matter the crime. If you're an ex-convict, you don't get the right to vote, and that's in 13 states. Now, 37 of these states say that you can't vote if you're on parole or on probation, which is understandable. They have to show that they've learned their lesson, and I understand that. But 13 states that you can never, does that sound like freedom? Does that sound like America? You can't vote because you committed a crime, you played a minor role in selling drugs because you needed the money? It just doesn't sound right. So I actually was looking on this blog of a prisoner who's just released in September 6, 2010, and he wrote this. The thing about prison is that sleep becomes like a chore you do each day. You're never really tired, so you never really want to sleep. It just breaks up the time. I felt like I didn't want to sleep ever again. The next morning, I decided to go for a drive and thought I'd rent a car, but my driver's license had expired. I went to go get a new one, but because I'd been inside, they needed me to get a letter from my parole officer. So I just wandered around for a day. I felt like everyone was staring at me. You just feel completely lost. This is when he was just released, and he couldn't vote, he couldn't get food, he didn't have any money. He had to go to his parents to ask for money, and they wouldn't let him stay there because they assumed that he was going to be like Meg Griffin, angry, ex-convict who just wants to beat everybody up and be angry at the world. So, why should you care? You should care because your money might as well be going down the toilet if this cycle keeps on continuing. If you're paying for people to be rehabilitated in prisons and it's not happening, then why are we paying? It says that on average in 2008, the cost of criminal correction spending was $47 billion. That's a lot of money for something that's not changing anything. And for what? We need to see change. And there are a lot of different solutions that can come up, but this is mainly just to show you that you need to be aware and that you need to, I mean, how many of you know someone or have ever been in prison? I'm sure none of you have, and none of you plan to, but how many of you know someone who's been in prison? And how did they act when they came out?
He was the same, which was really weird. I didn't expect that.
Better than he was before, but different circumstance that you haven't explained, but
Yeah.
I can say.
Well, anyways, yeah, I don't know. This is just like the majority. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are definitely cases where prison does help and it scares the living hell out of people. Like, I don't want my freedom taken away, and they do come out a positive person. But I'm talking about drug abusers, people with violent issues and anger management and things that they lash out on. Things need to be rehabilitated inside prison, and it's not happening. So, this can't happen anymore. No more Meg Griffin into this mean lady. This is also Meg Griffin, but just different personalities. Okay, thank you.
Karen, you're